Hello, everyone. I'm Ulrich Sidney. I'm founder and president of the Association of Future African Neurosurgeons. I'm equally a research associate at the program in global surgery and social change at Harvard Medical School. And today we have another set of presentations by the members of the Association of Future African Neurosurgeons. This second presentation will be led by Zolo Ivan and will be on status epilepticus. Before we have this presentation, we'll have the members in attendance present themselves. So we'll start with Dr. Regis. Dr. Regis, can you present yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. One more time. I'm a Regis, a resident neurosurgeon in Ivory Coast, member of AFAN. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Next one will be Dr. Kabulo. Can you present yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kabulo from Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm a resident at University of Zimbabwe.
And thank you so much, Dr. Kabulo. I think the other two have mic issues. So, Darwin, can you present yourself, please?
My name is Darwin Chimba. I'm a medical student from Copperbelt University of Zambia. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Now, Zolo, Ivan, you can present yourself and go ahead with your presentation. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Zolo Ivan, a medical student from the University of Buea.
Your mic, please, Zolo. Your mic.
Yes, I think, okay. Are you getting me right now?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So I'm Zolo Ivan, medical student from the University of Buea in Cameroon. I'm a member of the Association of Future African Neurosurgeons. I'll be presenting today on the, first of all, I'm happy to be here and it's a pleasure to be here. I'll be presenting today on the management of status epilepticus. Let me go right away and share my screen.
Okay, I already noticed that there's a bit of a lag in your connection. So while you're presenting, please cut the video feed as usual, and then we can run with it.
All right.
Thanks.
Good. Okay, so here we go. Can everyone see the screen?
Perfectly.
Yeah, it's okay.
Hello, Zolo. Perhaps we lost him. I'll try and contact him via WhatsApp.
Yeah, I think there's an internet issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can edit this out.
And yeah, so while we're waiting on that, I mean, well, let's see.
I'm back. Sorry, my network is extremely poor.
Oh, yeah, it's fine. It happens.
Okay. So that's the outline I'm going to follow. So as introduction,
I'm sorry.
A seizure is a sudden
we can't see your slides. Sorry, we can't see your slides.
Okay, let me come back to it. Let me share it back.
Excuse me, can you get us his PowerPoint, Ulrich?
You probably will have to do it because I have to run for a meeting in a.
Okay. If he wants to email me the PowerPoint, if it continues, okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Well, let's see how it goes. And send it to me if it happens again. Okay.
Okay. So a seizure is a sudden uncontrolled electrical disturbance in the brain. It can cause, which can cause changes in behavior, movement, feelings, and level of consciousness. Seizure types vary by where and how they begin in the brain. Most seizures last for 30 seconds to 2 minutes. But a seizure that lasts longer than 5 minutes is a medical emergency. So a seizure can happen after a stroke, a closed head injury, and infection such as meningitis or another illness like malaria. Many a times the cause of the seizure is unknown. Epilepsy is a disorder of the brain characterized by repeated seizures. Normally, the brain continuously generates tiny electrical impulses in an orderly manner, and these impulses travel along neurons and through the whole body via neurotransmitters. In epilepsy, the brain's electrical rhythms have a tendency to become imbalanced, resulting in a recurrent seizure. In patients with seizures, the normal electrical pattern is disrupted by sudden and synchronized bursts of electrical energy that may. Epilepsy is usually diagnosed after a person has had at least 2 seizures that were not caused by a known medical condition such as alcohol withdrawal or extremely low blood sugar level. So if a seizure arises from a specific area of the brain, then the initial symptom of the seizure often reflects the function of that area. If you look at this diagram, for example, if the seizure originates from the somatosensory area, you are going to have the initial symptom or presentation of that seizure is going to be a tingling sensation. Depending on where it arises, typical seizures belong in one of the 2 basic categories, which are primary generalized seizure and partial seizures. The difference between these 2 types is in how they begin, how the seizure begins. For example, in a primary generalized seizure, the seizure begins with a widespread electrical discharge that involves both sides of the brain at once. Like here, you see here, you have the 2 centers. So the seizure starts at both sides at once. That is a primary generalized seizure. And in partial seizure, the seizure begins with an electrical discharge in one limited area of the brain. Yeah. So that's the main difference. You can put it like that. So status epilepticus, which is our main interest, is a medical emergency associated with significant morbidity and mortality. The basic processes generating status epilepticus may be seen as a failure of the normal mechanism that terminate a seizure. So for status epilepticus to occur, the normal mechanism that terminate a seizure should be disrupted. So reduced inhibition and persistence excessive excitation create interactions that produce a sustained ongoing seizure activity. So this table here, or this picture here, summarizes what I just said. So normally in a normal brain, there you have excitation and you have inhibition. Inhibition is being carried by the GABAergic receptors or GABA neurotransmitter, and excitation is compared to inhibition. A brain that is undergoing like an epileptic crisis, the excitation is higher compared to the inhibition. And here, this picture, we have GABA, this receptor is here, and that's what causes inhibition. So inhibition is GABA, excitation is glutamate. You see it eventually act. So status epilepticus can be defined as a continuous generalized convulsive seizure lasting greater than 5 minutes, or 2 or more seizures during which the patient does not return to the baseline function, because many people usually focus on the duration of epilepticus, but you should not forget about this other aspect of the definition. 2 or more seizures during which the patient does not return to the baseline consciousness. Experimental studies have shown irreversible neuronal damage after about 30 minutes of continuing epileptic activity. So you should not wait till you have 30 minutes of convulsion, then we can start speaking about status epilepticus like it used to be defined before. Some clinical data indicate that spontaneous cessation of generalized convulsive seizure is unlikely after 5 minutes, and therefore acute treatment with an anticonvulsant is required. So don't wait. Once you have your criteria, go in and treat the patient. Experimental clinical studies are based on the 5, 10, and 30 minutes duration as to define the status epilepticus. But the longer the seizure continues, the more difficult it is to control the seizure with the normal anti-epileptic drug that we have, and this can also lead to refractory status epilepticus, which is I would say is a very dangerous situation for the patient. Refractory status epilepticus is defined as a continuous or repetitive seizure lasting longer than 60 minutes despite treatment. Very important, despite treatment. And another, despite treatment, and that is if the treatment is inadequate loading doses, like if the treatment is adequate, because at times you are going to give a treatment to the patient, but you are either underdosing the medication, and then you might tend to define it as being refractory status epilepticus. No, it is if you have had a continuous repetitive seizures lasting longer than 60 minutes, despite adequate loading doses, adequate treatment. So malignant status epilepticus is a severe variant of refractory status epilepticus in which the seizure fails to respond to aggressive treatment with even anesthetic agents. It typically occurs in young patients in the setting of encephalitis. Semiologically and electrophysiologically, there are several types of seizures. These have been broadly classified as either generalized or partial seizures. Epilepticus may be classified broadly as convulsive status epilepticus and non-convulsive status epilepticus. A vital statement. So, convulsive status epilepticus can be further classified into tonic-clonic status epilepticus, tonic status epilepticus, clonic status epilepticus, and myoclonic status epilepticus. While non-convulsive status epilepticus refers to continuous or near continuous generalized electrical seizure activity lasting for at least 30 minutes, but without physical convulsions. That is the hallmark of its definition for non-convulsive. The name indicates non-convulsive status epilepticus. So it is further divided into absence status epilepticus and complex partial status epilepticus. Convulsive status epilepticus may evolve into the non-convulsive form after treatment, or non-convulsive epilepticus may arise de novo. Like you can move from convulsive status epilepticus to non-convulsive, or you can just have a patient who go into the non-convulsive status epilepticus without passing through the convulsive epilepticus. So for epidemiology, up to 150,000 cases of status epilepticus occur annually in the United States. Yes, Dr. Regis just corrected my brother on this. But to have adequate information on Africa is a bit difficult. So, of these 150,000 cases, I think this is actually going to I think it's a reason why we should undertake more research to have our own data. So of these 150,000 cases of status epilepticus that occur annually in the United States, 55,000 are associated with death. Status epilepticus appears to be more frequent among men, blacks, and the aged. Nearly a quarter of persons presenting with status epilepticus have pre-existing epilepsy. That is nearly a quarter. With drop in serum levels of anti-epileptic drugs due to non-compliance or other reasons, it is most common mechanism of status epilepticus in such instances. So if you have a patient who has a pre-existing epilepsy and who presents in status epilepticus, these are the most common reasons why the patient goes into status epilepticus. So causes of status epilepticus may differ according to the age and the presentation and the geographic location. That is, in central, for example, the central nervous system infection may predominate in children, and cerebral malaria can be a common cause in the malaria endemic area. So that is what has to do with the age and the geographic localization as the cause of the status epilepticus. More than half of the SE episodes occur in patients without a history of prior seizure. Very important to note, more than half. A variety of drugs and medications may reduce the seizure threshold or increase the clearance of anti-epileptic drugs and predispose the patient to status epilepticus. So the risk factors associated with SE are poorly controlled epilepsy. I've mentioned that. low blood sugar, stroke, kidney failure, liver failure, encephalitis, HIV, alcohol or drug abuse, genetic diseases such as Fragile X syndrome and Angelman syndrome, head and also head injuries. Those are the major risk factors for status epilepticus. So let us look at the pathology. For status epilepticus to evolve through status epilepticus evolves through an initiation phase to a maintenance phase. So you have initiation and then maintenance. In the initiation phase, the triggering stimuli evoke discrete seizures that tend to abate as soon as the stimulus is removed. So initiation, we have
I guess we lost Zolo. We'll see if he comes back. It seemed to work a bit there. Are you there, Ulrich? Can anybody hear me? Hello, is anybody there?
I'm here.
Yeah,
Can
yeah,
hear
I'm
you.
here.
Oh, okay. So I guess we dropped Zolo. Are you there, Ulrich? I think so.
sorry, poor network.
Okay, there you go. Go ahead, Zolo. Continue.
Yeah. Okay, so I was speaking about the maintenance phase. I'll just explain it. So here on this, are you seeing the slide?
It's a pathology slide.
Okay, good. Yes, that's the slide. So yeah, before we get to speak about status epilepticus, it's good we remember ourselves about the basic action potential, the basic physiology behind it. So in a normal cell membrane, you have in the extracellular milieu or the extracellular compartment, you have more of sodium and chloride. Meanwhile, in the intracellular, you have more of potassium and less chloride, can put it like that. So there's going to be a stimuli which is going to cause an influx in the sodium ions into the across the membrane into the cell, and this is going to continue until it reaches a certain threshold where an action potential, actually a depolarization is generated. So you have here, remember that sodium enters for the depolarization to occur. So you have depolarization because the amount of sodium has reached the threshold, and it continues until it reaches a point where we have the repolarization. In the repolarization, the ion involved here is potassium. Remember that depolarization is sodium entering, repolarization is potassium going out, until you have back the hyperpolarization. This is very important because we are going to realize that this is where the whole pathophysiology, if I put it like that, of status epilepticus arise, or seizure even. So we have this in mind. We continue. The intensity and duration of the stimulation has a direct influence on the transition from molecules have been found to be involved here. A variety of signaling molecules have been found to be involved in the initiation phase, such as GABA antagonists. I'll explain why after. GABA antagonists. We have glutamate agonists, cholinergic agonists, tachykinins, galanin antagonists, and opioid K antagonists. In contrast to this, much less is known about the maintenance phase. So initiation, we have our responsible guys, like that, those responsible for the initiation phase. So limited number of molecules have been found that can block or end the maintenance phase. These are N-methyl D-aspartate antagonists. That is, let us go back to block or end the maintenance phase. So to block or end maintenance substance and we have dynorphin. In experimental electrolyte of stimulation, experimental electrogenic epilepticus, the limbic system is clearly at risk, at increased risk for injury during SE, and due to its nature and connections with the rest of the brain, it may play a crucial role in the generation of seizures. It has been hypothesized that within the limbic system, the dentate gyrus acts as the gatekeeper and prevents excitatory stimulation from spreading through the hippocampus until a point of maximal dentate activation is reached. Very important, this statement. Once this point is exceeded, excitatory inputs can spread through the hippocampus and then propagate neurocortical areas. So GABA is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the CNS. So it is released from the GABAergic neurons and binds to several types of GABA receptors. So GABA receptors are macromolecule proteins that form a chloride ion channel complex and contain specific binding sites for GABA and a number of allosteric regulators, including barbiturates, benzodiazepines, and a number of anesthetic agents. So we have the GABA receptor. So we have a site for GABA, we have a site for the benzodiazepine, and other barbiturates. So that is it. So GABA receptor mediated inhibition may be responsible for the normal termination of a seizure. This is a vital statement, as I already showed in the previous diagram. In addition, the activation of the N-methyl D-aspartate receptor by the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate may be required for the propagation of seizures. So we have our two culprits here. We have those that are responsible for terminating seizure, and those that are maintaining the seizure. So yeah, we have the different. This is going to be important when you're going to be looking at the management of epilepticus. So activation of N-methyl D-aspartate receptor results in increased level of intracellular calcium, which may be responsible for the nerve cell injury seen in patients with status epilepticus. So this is an N-methyl D-aspartate receptor here. So we have a site for glutamate. As we already said, glutamate is excitatory. The site for glutamate and glycine, and we see that it is a gateway for calcium. Not only calcium ion, there's also sodium ion. So this is the same receptor here. You see, and we explain that for an action potential to be generated, sodium has to get in. So we see it again here that if this receptor is there to maintain the seizure, then it has to do with some sort of excitation, and that is why the sodium will keep on going in, and the calcium also. So a growing body of evidence from research and clinical observation support the concept that epilepticus becomes more difficult to control as its duration increases. It has been postulated that this may occur due to a mechanistic shift from inadequate GABAergic inhibitory receptors mediated transmission to excessive N-methyl D-aspartate excitatory receptor mediated transmission. So very important statement that you have been explaining since a while now. So this phenomenon has important clinical implications. Benzodiazepine-like drugs which potentiate GABAergic inhibition have an important role in the early initiation phase of status epilepticus, but they may prove ineffective in the advanced stages of status epilepticus when the N-methyl D-aspartate antagonists have the potential to be beneficial. So if you need to treat your status epilepticus and using GABAergic receptor, drugs that act on the GABAergic receptor, you have to do it earlier, because as time goes, it's no more going to be effective. Why are we observing it? This diagram explains it. You see, as in a baseline neuron, we have in the postsynaptic membrane, we have GABA receptor and we have N-methyl-aspartate receptor. These are the ones in red, and GABA is in green. As the seizure the seizure continues, if I can put it, as time goes, you see that these GABA receptors are going to be reduced, they're going to be internalized, they're going to disappear, if I can put it like that. And the ones that are going to be mainly present are going to be the N-methyl-aspartate receptor. And which means that if you have continuous stimulation of the N-methyl-aspartate receptor to fight the seizure now, you will need to put a drug that is going to affect the N-methyl-aspartate receptor and no more the GABAergic receptors. So this is very important in understanding the management of status epilepticus. So prolonged epileptiform bursting results in a reduction of the GABA-mediated synaptic inhibition, as we already said. Furthermore, it is seen that constitutive internalization of the GABA receptor is rapid and accelerated by the increased neuronal activity associated with seizure, and the inhibition of neuronal activity reduces the rate of internalization. These findings suggest that the rate of GABA receptor internalization is regulated by neuronal activity, and its acceleration contributes to the reduction of inhibitory transmission of after preparation part stimulation and when it is administered earlier, because earlier when if you introduce it, when diazepam, this is just an answer, when diazepam was given 60 milliliters receptors at the 10th seizure, you have internalization of the GABA receptor. Sorry, connection poor.
Okay, you fell off there. Okay.
Oops. Good. So as time goes,
We don't see the screen yet.
you are going to have more expression of the N-methyl-aspartate receptors. Why? Reception is now. Is it okay now? Hello. Okay. Dr. Ben.
Yes.
Are you seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So you can. So in humans and experimental animals, sustained seizure cause selective neuronal and the thalamus. The degree of neuronal injury is closely related to the duration of the seizure, underscoring the importance of rapid control of status epilepticus. Neuron-specific enolase, which is a marker for acute neurological injury, has been demonstrated to be increased in patients with non-convulsive status epilepticus who did not have preceding or coexisting cerebral injury. Neuronal death is probably caused by the release of excitatory neurotransmitters. In animals, in animal models, the most effective agent in aborting the maintenance stage of status epilepticus are the N-methyl-aspartate blockers, substance P antagonists, galanine, and D-norphine. We have already mentioned this. Maladaptive changes such as an increase in substance P and decreased galanine may contribute to the maintenance of status epilepticus. So possible mechanisms contributing to termination of status epilepticus may include neuronal injury, depletion of metabolic stores, depletion of excitatory neurotransmitters, or a late enhancement of the inhibitory mechanism. Status epilepticus may be broadly divided into two stages. We have the first stage, which is characterized by the generalized convulsive tonic-clonic seizure that associated with an increase in autonomic activity, resulting in hypertension, hyperglycemia, sweating, salivation, and hyperpyrexia, which are some of the signs with which the patient presents when it's in status epilepticus. And during this first stage, we have cerebral blood flow, which is being increased due to increased cerebral metabolic demand. In the second stage of status epilepticus, it occurs approximately about 30 minutes, and some say 5 to 10. Failure of cerebral autoregulation, decrease in cerebral blood flow, increase in the intrahypotension. Electromechanical dissociation may occur in which, although electrical selected to minor 5 distinct electrographic stages. We have the first stage, which is the discrete electrographic seizure, which is here on A. Discrete electrographic seizure, we have them discrete here. Stage B, which is merging of electrical seizure, waxing and waning of ictal stages, which is here. Here we have merging of the seizures. In C, we have continuous ictal discharges. In C, we have under D, we have continuous ictal discharges punctuated by flat periods. In D, we have continuous ictal discharges, then we have a flat period, continuous ictal discharges, flat period, continuous flat period. And then periodic epileptiform discharges against a relatively flat background, which is here. So we have some here and relatively normal background from China. And then this F is just like a normal, no seizure here. So good. So how do you make a diagnosis? Diagnosis must be reached quickly, as we already say, it's a medical emergency, as delayed in recognition can lead to brain tissue damage and even iatrogenic complications due to aggressive treatment later on. A good anamnesis and physical examination is sufficient to make a diagnosis of status epilepticus, though an electroencephalogram might be required to differentiate the types of the status epilepticus. So video EEG monitoring is the gold standard to differentiate the mimickers of status epilepticus. Diagnosis of non-convulsive status epilepticus can be challenging. It may not be considered in patients who present in altered sensorium or coma following a convulsion. All comatose patients should therefore be carefully examined for evidence of minor twitching, which may involve the face, hands, or feet, or may present as nystagmoid jerking of the eyes. In some patients with coma and overt seizure activity, 8% have non-convulsive status epilepticus as determined by the EEG monitoring. Therefore, it is essential that urgent EEG be performed in patients with epilepticus are easy to diagnose by clinical criteria alone. The electroencephalography for the diagnosis and classification of the non-convulsive epilepticus. EEG is also valuable in classifying epilepticus and in monitoring the response of the therapy. This is vital. Typically, EEG features are, this is what you're going to see on an EEG, all this complex stuff, not very important. Anyway, so in the management, one, protection of the vital functions. Two, particularly and appropriate anticonvulsivant, you're wasting time to the patient, and you see, you know that as the seizure goes ahead, the chance for you to stop the seizure is reduced, and the energy you're going to need to stop in terms of financial also, because you're in Africa, very poor continent in quote, you need more resources to to save the life of the patient. So if you are able to diagnose it earlier and to manage it earlier, you are going to cause more good to the patient from potential death. So this needs to be followed by a systemic evaluation of the cause of the sepsis epilepticus and steps to prevent complication and recurrence of the seizure. So protection of vital function, early and energetic treatment. Then now you can look for the underlying cause of the sepsis epilepticus eventually to prevent recurrent seizures. So as general measures, ensure an adequate airway and provide respiratory support. Position the patient such that self-injury is prevented during seizure activity. Patients are not breathing during a generalized clonic seizure. So they are not at risk of aspiration until the event ends. Patients should be rolled over onto his or her side immediately after the motor activity ceases. After the motor activity ceases, then that's when you can hold the patient. It's nothing to be rolling him while he's still having the motor seizures from each other. So to prevent injury to the patient, suction of the oropharynx can wait until the end of the seizure. Don't try to put something into his mouth. No tongue depressor or other objects should be put between locked teeth. Gentle suction can be applied to remove saliva and blood, if any, after the seizure. 2 large gauge intravenous catheters should be inserted to facilitate free resuscitation and pharmacotherapy, that is after the seizure. If peripheral venous access is difficult, the placement of a central venous catheter is recommended. I repeat, all this is after the seizure. Despite the periods of apnea and cyanosis that occur during the tonic or clonic phases of the seizure, most patients in status epilepticus breathe sufficiently well as long as the airway remains clear. Endotracheal intubation will be required in patients who continue to experience seizures the seizure activity and facilitate intubation clonic seizure activity despite this pharmacologic intervention. Rocuronium at this dosage, which is a short-acting non-depolarizing muscle relaxant that has little effect on blood pressure and intracranial pressure, is the preferred agent. So succinylcholine should be avoided if possible, as some of these patients with prolonged convulsions may be prone to hyperkalemia secondary to rhabdomyolysis. Hypoglycemia must be excluded rapidly in all patients presenting with status epilepticus, and corrective measures must be instituted if serum glucose is low. If prompt measurements of blood glucose level is not possible, the patient should receive 100 milligrams of thiamine intravenously, followed by 50 milliliter bolus of 50% glucose, 5% glucose. I mean. So, small question is, why should we give thiamine? Anyway, I guess we are going to answer it during the discussion. So, the blood pressure, electrocardiography, and the core temperature should be monitored. If patient develops, remember that we are still in the general measures. If patient develops significant hyperthermia, passive cooling is required. The maintenance of adequate hydration is necessary to prevent myoglobin-induced renal failure from muscle breakdown resulting from the seizure, the rhabdomyolysis. So forced saline solution diuresis and urinary alkalization should be considered in the presence of myoglobinuria or significantly elevated serum creatinine kinase level. Once the seizures are controlled, imaging of the brain and cerebrospinal fluid examination will be useful in patients who do not have a past history of seizure disorder. Very important to say, once the seizure are controlled. So don't waste time while the patient is convulsing to doing all this. The most important thing is to give the general measures and to stop the seizure. Then you can now go on to explore your patient. It must be emphasized that the first priority is to control the seizure, as we already said. So we have already spoken about the general measures. Now let us now look at the pharmacotherapy of status epilepticus. As we saw, this diagram is coming back. So the goal of pharmacologic therapy is to achieve rapid and safe termination of the seizure and to prevent its recurrence without adverse effect on the cardiovascular and the respiratory system or alteration of the level of consciousness. This is the goal. Benzodiazepines like diazepam, lorazepam, midazolam, and hydantoin are the first-line drugs for termination of status epilepticus. First-line drugs. This drug, and we know why. The GABA receptor. First line, GABA receptor. All right. Excuse me. I'll terminate this first. Good. Sorry about that. So these drugs have different pharmacodynamic and pharmacokinetic properties, which determine the rapidity of their clinical effect, their efficacy in terminating status epilepticus, and their duration of action, that is in the early onset of the status epilepticus, before internalization of the receptor on which they act. So this table shows the pharmacokinetic parameters of commonly used drugs for status epilepticus. So you have the latency period, which is the interval between the commencement of infusion and the onset of action, and you have the duration, which is the time for onset of infusion for which the drug may maintain adequate anticonvulsant level in the blood. So here you have the table. Benzodiazepine carry the disadvantage of excessive sedation, which may interfere with the subsequent monitoring of the patient. The benzodiazepines bind to the benzodiazepine binding site on the GABA receptor, increasing the GABAergic transmission, while the barbiturates act directly on the GABA receptor. The anti-seizure activity of phenytoin is complex. However, its major action appears to be the blocking of voltage-sensitive use-dependent sodium channels. So, pre-hospital treatment of status epilepticus. The longer an episode of status epilepticus continues, the more refractory to treatment it becomes, and the greater its likelihood of complication. I'm going to be repeating this statement as long as possible. More prolonged seizure carry higher risk of mortality. Hence, it will be useful to initiate treatment for status epilepticus even as the patient is being transported to the hospital. That is, if you want to cause less damage to the patient, if you want the patient to spend less money, let us treat the seizure as early as possible. And the first people to be close to the patient are the paramedics that bring the patient to the hospital in the ambulance. So paramedics and ambulance staff is, if trained appropriately, could administer preliminary treatment even before shifting the patient to the hospital and save valuable time and money too. So trials have been conducted in pre-hospital settings comparing buccal midazolam with rectal diazepam for the treatment of continuing seizures in children and adolescents. The midazolam dose is usually 0.2 to 0.3 milligram per kilogram IM or intranasal or buccal, or 10 milligram in an adult. The onset of the action is within 1 to 5 minutes. Buccal midazolam was found to be equally effective or better than rectal diazepam in terminating seizures without causing any increase in adverse cardiorespiratory events or need for ventilation. Current evidence indicates that lorazepam administered intravenously in out of hospital settings by paramedics or in emergency room setting is superior to diazepam and phenytoin in abolishing status epilepticus in a short period of time. Vital. The pharmacokinetic properties of lorazepam favors its use over that of diazepam. The anticonvulsant effect of a single dose of diazepam is very brief, that is 20 minutes, whereas that of lorazepam is much longer, 6 hours. Also, the risk of a respiratory depression may be greater with diazepam. So, let us use lorazepam. Although diazepam has a much longer elimination half-life, it is rapidly redistributed from the brain to the peripheral fat stores due to its high lipid solubility, which accounts for its shorter anticonvulsant activity. Lorazepam should be stored in light-proof containers and should be restocked every 4 to 6 months. So this lorazepam is going to be a great drug for us Africans. You can store it for up to, it can be stored for up to 4 to 6 months. Although refrigeration is recommended for lorazepam, but not for diazepam, these guys have demonstrated that lorazepam retains 90% of its original potency even when stored without refrigeration in ambulances for as long as 5 months. This is good for Africa. Several groups recommend that phenytoin or phenytoin be given following the administration of lorazepam. While there is no data to demonstrate that the administration of phenytoin following the use of lorazepam increases the response rate, it may be reasonable to use it in situations where recurrent seizures requiring anti-epileptic drug therapy are anticipated. For example, in patients having acute encephalitis, IV phosphenytoin is the best second-line therapy in status epilepticus. It is quickly dephosphorylated to phenytoin when given IM or IV. Phosphenytoin has several advantages over phenytoin. It can be infused using standard intravenous solution, whereas phenytoin should not be given in dextrose containing fluids. That is because it's going to cause some precipitation. It can be given phosphenytoin can be given intramuscularly. Phosphenytoin can be infused at a faster rate than phenytoin, which carries some risk of cardiac arrhythmia and hypotension, especially in the elderly. So intramuscular administration of phosphenytoin is well tolerated and cardiac monitoring is not required. Also good for Africa because most of our hospitals don't have monitors for cardiac monitoring. So continuous EEG monitoring is also part of the management of status epilepticus. It offers several advantages in the management of status epilepticus. It is useful in patients who do not recover consciousness once the convulsive seizure has been aborted. In a study of status epilepticus patients who had remained in altered sensorium after convulsive status epilepticus, 48% had continued electrographic seizure and 14% had persistent non-convulsive status epilepticus. Abnormal eye movements in a patient who had neurosurgical intervention, brain tumor, or past history of stroke or meningitis is a good pointer for non-convulsive status epilepticus. So abnormal eye movement under such circumstances has high sensitivity but low specificity. An emergency EEG evaluation would be useful in such circumstances. The goal regarding the activity pattern of the EEG remains a matter of debate. There is no prospective collected evidence that a burst suppression EEG pattern is required for or indicative of the termination of status epilepticus. This is important to note. So Africa wins. Many patients may achieve complete seizure control when the EEG background reveals continuous slow activity. EEG must be checked hourly once the patient achieves a stable response to the selected drug. When continuous EEG is used, the primary endpoint for therapy is suppression of the electroencephalographic spikes. I repeat, when continuous EEG is used, the primary endpoint for the therapy is suppression of electroencephalographic spikes. It may be necessary to continue therapy or increase the dosage until EEG shows a burst suppression pattern with short interburst intervals, provided the patient is hemodynamically stable. There is less chance for breakthrough seizure when the EEG shows burst suppression rather than a slow activity. It is useful to regularly check the blood levels of phenytoin or other anti-epileptic drugs to ensure that adequate levels are maintained through the therapy. In resource-poor nation, frequent blood level monitoring may not be feasible in our case. So interaction between different drugs as well as a systemic disorder and organ dysfunction can lead to unexplained fluctuation in the blood levels of anti-epileptic drugs. Refractory sepsis epilepticus, in about 30% of sepsis epilepticus may, about 30% of sepsis epilepticus may prove resistant to standard treatment with one of the benzodiazepine and phenytoin. Probably refractory sepsis epilepticus is rather underdiagnosed and under-recognized too. This subgroup of patients has higher risks of complication and extended hospital stay and mortality. Most of them have some underlying structural cerebral damage or metabolic disorder or cerebral hypoxia. Patients with non-convulsive status epilepticus and focal motor status epilepticus are more likely to enter the phase of refractory status epilepticus. Other risk factors include delay in receiving treatment, metabolic encephalopathy, hypoxia, and encephalitis. Few patients who fail to respond to a first-line drug are likely to respond to an alternative drug from among the first-line drugs. So, if seizure continues after administration of lorazepam and posphenitoin in appropriate dosages, a provisional diagnosis of a refractory status epilepticus needs to be made. Such patients will require admission to an intensive care unit for close monitoring and more aggressive treatment under assisted ventilation. So if you have such patient in a resource-limited center, you refer your patient. Facilities for endotracheal intubation and ventilation may not be available in most of the peripheral hospitals in Cameroon and other low-medium income countries. An alternative regimen that will not require administration of muscle relaxants, endotracheal intubation, and ventilation will be handy in such situations. Recently, new regimens that avoid assisted ventilation have been tried in the management of status epilepticus. Their mechanisms of action are different from that of benzodiazepines and phenytoin, which depend on the GABAergic inhibition and the sodium channel blocking, respectively. So, one of these drugs is sodium valproate, which is a broad-spectrum anti-epileptic drug that has been in clinical use for several decades, but only recently has it been evaluated as an intravenous preparation for the treatment of status epilepticus. Intravenous valproate is a therapeutic option for those patients with cardiorespiratory impairment and with a do not ventilate status and myoclonic status epilepticus. It is non-sedative drug. It's a non-sedative drug with an attractive safety profile and it is easy to use. IV valproate is well tolerated by even unstable patients with status epilepticus. So this is a structure of the valproate, and this is one of the forms under which it comes. So in a recent trial, 68 patients with convulsive status epilepticus were randomized to receive either IV valproate or phenytoin. Those who received IV valproate had significant higher rate of cessation of the seizure when compared to IV phenytoin group. In each group, those who failed to respond were given the other drug as a second-line treatment. As the second-line agent, valproate was effective in 79%, while phenytoin was effective in only 25%. So we have our winner here. Tolerability did not differ between the two groups. There was no hemodynamic instability too. The standard loading dose for intravenous administration is 25 mg per kilogram. Nevertheless, in emergency situations, higher doses of 30 to 60 mg per kilogram can be used. It is well tolerated at relatively fast infusion rates of 5 to 6 mg per kilogram per minute. And experience with the IV valproate in the treatment of status epilepticus is too limited to allow recommendation of its use as first-line agent. So contraindication for its use include severe liver dysfunction, thrombocytopenia, and active bleeding. The target serum level for valproate in sepsis epilepticus ranges from 70 to 140 microgram per milliliter. It is, its main advantages are the lack of sedation and the fact that intubation for assisted ventilation can be avoided. Levetiracetam is another relatively new anti-epileptic drug that has a potential, that has a potentially important role in the management of refractory status epilepticus. It is available as intravenous preparation that can be infused rapidly without the necessity of ventilation assistance, which is a good news for resource-limited hospitals. However, its efficacy has not yet been demonstrated through randomized controlled trials. In some of the pioneer studies, seizure control has been achieved in patients with refractory status epilepticus by administration of 300 milligram per day. Topiramate is another new anti-epileptic drug with a mechanism of action that is different from that of benzodiazepine and other first-line anti-epileptic drugs. When administered by nasogastric tube in doses ranging from 300 to 160 milligrams per day, it was effective in aborting refractive status epilepticus. In a small study conducted in children with refractive status epilepticus, seizures were terminated with topiramate given in a loading dose of 10 milligrams per kilogram per day, followed by a maintenance dose of 5 milligrams per kilogram per day. This is the structure, and this is the form under which it can come. So, this is a summary of what we just said. Newer drugs such as levetiracetam and topiramate have a potentially important place in the management of status epilepticus. Their mechanism of action is independent of the GABA-mediated inhibition, which tend to become ineffective beyond the first few minutes of status epilepticus. These anti-epileptic drugs are well tolerated even at rapid infusion rates and may not aggravate multiple organ dysfunction. They can be administered without ventilator assistance, which is good for Africa, as they cause little sedation. Nevertheless, their safety and efficacy is in controlling status epilepticus need to be confirmed through well-designed controlled trials. So let us now look at the management of patients with status epilepticus who are, with ventilator assistance. This is for more those centers that have more resources. So patients with refractory status epilepticus who have not responded to the first-line treatment will require admission to the intensive care unit for more aggressive management under assisted ventilation. A reappraisal of the metabolic status and the potential underlying disorder that provoke the refractory status epilepticus is often necessary at this point. Continuous EEG monitoring can be helpful at this stage. Arterial and central venous access is necessary too. Continuous infusion of phenobarbital, midazolam, propofol, or pentobarbital, preferably under continuous EEG monitoring, can also be tried. So the electroencephalographic objective of the therapy is the burst suppression pattern, which needs to be continued for 12 hours after the last seizure. Infusion of the anesthetic agent can be reduced every 3 hours with EEG monitoring, and if there are no clinical or EEG seizures, the patient can be weaned off the ventilator. If seizure recurs, the same agent to which it had responded earlier must be restarted with weaning attempts after 12 hours. Mortality is related to the patient's age and duration of the status epilepticus rather than the choice of the anti-epileptic drug. So let us look at some of the drugs used. So phenobarbital is a long-acting barbiturate that acts by potentiating of GABA and by interfering with the sodium and potassium transport across the cell membrane. It is found to be effective in patients in which lorazepam or phosphate have failed, and with or without valproate. The loading dose is 20 milligram per kilogram IV with a maximum infusion rate of 50 to 100 milligram per minute. The elimination The illumination half-life is 72 hours. Contraindications include severe liver function. The main side effects are respiratory depression, prolonged sedation, allergy, and blood dyscariasis. Let us look at the other one, propofol. It's an alkyl phenol that has been used extensively for the induction and maintenance of anesthesia and for sedation in the intensive care unit. Propofol is a global CNS depressant. It directly activates the GABA receptor. In addition, propofol inhibits the N-methyl D-aspartate receptor, which modulates calcium influx through slow calcium ion channel and has an antioxidant activity. The excellent pharmacokinetics and favorable adverse effects profile makes propofol the ideal drug for treating refractory status epilepticus. The two main advantages of propofol are rapid onset and the short duration of the action. Propofol is a highly lipophilic agent with a large volume distribution. With a large volume of distribution, this property results in its rapid uptake and elimination from the CNS, thereby giving it rapid onset of action and allowing rapid recovery upon discontinuation. Recovery is rapid even after prolonged use. Propofol is metabolized by glucuronidation and sulfate conjugation and does not accumulate even after long-term infusion. No dose reduction is required in patients with hepatic or renal disease. This is a good news. Concomitant IV benzodiazepine allows use of a lower and safer dose of propofol. That is, benzodiazepine infusion is used as a propofol dose sparing technique. This is good for resource-limited areas. Benzodiazepines, when administered concomitantly with IV propofol, have a dose-sparing effect on propofol, and so lower doses can be equally effective. The usual loading dose ranges from 3 to 5 milligrams per kilogram, but loading doses as high as 10 milligrams per kilogram have been safely used. This should be followed by maintenance infusion at the rate of 30 to 100 micrograms per kilogram per minute, which should be titrated to burst suppression pattern. Status epilepticus stop within 10 minutes in most situations. After 12 hours of seizure suppression, the dose can be gradually reduced by 50% over the next 12 hours, and if there is no relapse, it can be withdrawn slowly over the subsequent 12 hours. So if seizure relapses during the weaning period, a further loading dose of 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram can be administered, and the maintenance infusion can be continued until 12 hours seizure-free period occurs. Propofol infusion syndrome is a rare complication that occurs when the dosage exceeds 5 milligrams per kilogram per hour for more than 48 hours. The propofol infusion syndrome is a potentially fatal condition characterized by severe metabolic acidosis, hyperlipidemia, rhabdomyolysis, and cardiovascular collapse. It appears that this disorder is due to interference with mitochondrial respiration. The full-blown syndrome tends to occur only in those individuals with a genetic susceptibility. However, the risk appears to be higher in children. Midazolam is a faster-acting water-soluble benzodiazepine with a half-life of 4 to 6 hours. It acts by binding to GABA receptors. Midazolam is an alternative to propofol, and the drug undergoes hepatic transformation into an active metabolite that is cleared by the kidneys. Midazolam is typically started after securing endotracheal intubation and ventilator assistance. It is usually started with a loading dose of 0.2 milligrams per kilogram, but increments of 0.2 to 0.4 milligram per kilogram can be given every 5 minutes until the seizure stops, or a maximum of 2.9 milligram per kilogram is reached. The maintenance dose is 0.1 to 0.2 milligram per kilogram per hour, given as an infusion to maintain electrographic suppression of the seizure. For breakthrough seizure, An additional bolus dose can be given, and the continuous IV infusion rate can be increased by approximately 20%. The anti-epileptic effect of midazolam lasts from minutes to hours. The reported failure rate with midazolam is 14 to 18%, so it is good for use. One of the major disadvantages of midazolam is tachyphylaxis, because of which the dose often has to be increased several fold to maintain seizure control. Furthermore, with a prolonged infusion, midazolam accumulates in the body, which may result in a prolonged time of awakening. High doses of barbiturate therapy is a treatment option in refractory status epilepticus. This regimen is often associated with hemodynamic instability and immune paresis. Due to these side effects, high-dose barbiturate therapy is reserved for those patients who do not respond to midazolam or propofol infusion. Intravenous pentobarbital and tiopenton are two regimens that are often tried. Pentobarbital has lower lipid solubility than tiopenton, hence it takes a longer time to achieve its peak effect, and it shows better correlation between serum concentration and clinical effect, especially after prolonged infusion. Most institutions prefer pentobarbital for induction and maintenance of drug-induced coma in patients who have failed propofol or midazolam. The loading dose is 5 mg per kilogram. Boluses of 5 mg per kilogram can be repeated until seizure stops. The maximum bolus rate is 25 to 50 mg per minute, and the usual maintenance dose is 0.5 to 10 mg per kilogram per hour, traditionally titrated to suppression of the burst on the EEG. So high doses of phenobarbital at accumulated daily doses of 80 mg per kilogram with a resulting serum level of more than 1000 micromole per liter has been shown to be effective in achieving seizure control in children with refractory status epilepticus. However, high doses of phenobarbital therapy can be considered in patients with refractory status epilepticus who get breakthrough seizure when midazolam or propofol is being tapered off after achieving short-term electrocerebral suppression. Phenobarbital has no anticonvulsant ceiling effect. The sedative and respiratory suppressant properties of phenobarbital are subject to tolerance over a relatively short time period, but the anticonvulsant activity is not. So this statement is very important. Now let us look at the role of inhalational anesthetics in treatment of status epilepticus. So inhalational anesthetic offer an alternative approach to the treatment of refractory status epilepticus. The advantages include efficacy, rapid onset of action, and the ability to titrate the dose according to the effect demonstrated on the EEG. Isoflurane and desflurane are the two agents that have been tried in the treatment of refractory status epilepticus because of the safety associated with their long-term administration. Isoflurane is the agent of choice for refractory status epilepticus. Isoflurane undergoes significantly less metabolism in the liver than halothane. So both inhalational agents that is isoflurane and desflurane, can cause dose-dependent reduction in blood pressure due to peripheral vasodilation and inotrope, and vasopressor may be required during their administration, besides adequate fluid resuscitation. Regardless of seizure type, isoflurane and desflurane have consistently stopped epileptic discharges with adequate sustained electrographic burst suppression within minutes of initiation of the therapy. Prolonged use of inhalational anesthetic is well tolerated, so this is good to know. Now let us look at the neurosurgical treatment neurosurgical treatment for refractory status epilepticus. In selected cases of refractory status epilepticus that have failed to respond to medical management, surgical intervention can be considered as a last resort. This is particularly applicable to cases with an underlying surgical remediable lesion. And a famous case is the Miranda Francisco hemispherectomy case in which a 4-year-old girl from Denver who was having a rate of 120 seizures a day, she was successfully operated by Professor Benjamin Carson. So this is one of the cases where you have one of the famous cases from Coachella where you have used neurosurgery to help somebody with refractory epilepticus. So maintenance therapy in the treatment of status epilepticus, it is important to ensure that adequate maintenance therapy is instituted simultaneously with the emergency treatment to prevent relapse of the status epilepticus. Patient already receiving anti-epileptic drugs will require some dose escalation or adjustment according to the prevailing blood drug level. In patients who are naive to the anti-epileptic drugs, one of the anti-epileptic drugs that had successfully terminated a seizure will have to be continued. If additional medication is needed, the most appropriate anti-epileptic drugs are topiramate and levetiracetam, as these drugs can be started at high doses with a low risk of idiosyncratic reaction. A patient who develops status epilepticus in the course of ethanol withdrawal may not need anti-epileptic drug therapy once the withdrawal has run its course. On the other hand, patients with a new ongoing epileptogenic insult may require high doses of anti-epileptic drugs to control their seizures. So let us look at some special situations, like patient having a status epilepticus, but some special situations. So certain medical conditions can present with status epilepticus. The management of status epilepticus in such situations may need special approaches. For example, porphyria can occasionally be complicated with status epilepticus, and most of the enzyme-inducing anti-epileptic drugs such as phenobarbital, phenytoin, carbamazepine, and lamotrigine are contraindicated in porphyria as they increase the porphyrin production. So, status epilepticus in these cases can be treated with parenteral magnesium sulfate, yes, or IV lorazepam without aggravating the porphyria. So, levetiracetam is a new anti-epileptic drug that can be tried in this situation too. So, high carbohydrate and hematine intake tends to reduce porphyrin production and thereby ameliorate the situation in patients with porphyria. When a status epilepticus is due to intoxication with using isoniazid, administration of high doses of pyridoxine can be useful. Seizures associated with the overdoses of tricyclic antidepressants and antimuscarinic agents may respond to physostigmine. Pyridoxine will be especially useful for suspected pyridoxine-independent seizures. So, aggressive treatment with anticonvulsant and plasma exchanges are useful for thrombotic thrombocytopenia purpura complicated with status epilepticus. For eclamptic seizure, parenteral magnesium sulfate could be used initially. Benzodiazepine can also be given without causing a depressant effect on the fetus. Phenytoin loading may be pursued with a lower dose since there is a reduced protein binding in pregnancy. Subsequently, 5 mg per kilogram can be given as a second dose. So, let us look at the complications in patients having status epilepticus. Patients with status epilepticus are prone to several medical complications, which are and the prolonged seizure can lead to multiple organ dysfunction. So, medications such as pentobarbital may depress the immune response of the subject and thereby predispose them to infection. So, this is one of the complications that we can have by giving the medication to the patient. But we have no choice than to treat the patient, because if you don't treat the patient dies. So this just, you have to bear the consequences or the complication. So non-neurological complications include nosocomial and ventilator-associated pneumonia for those who are being ventilated, atelectasis, adult respiratory distress syndrome, neurogenic pulmonary edema, pulmonary embolism, hypovolemia, myocardial dysfunction, hypertension, arrhythmia, stress ulcer, gastrointestinal bleeding, constipation, diarrhea, paralytic ileus, renal dysfunction, urinary tract infection, and vascular catheter-related sepsis. It is important to watch for these complications so as to detect them as early as possible and to institute the prompt treatment. So some of the pitfalls in the management of sepsis epilepticus are sepsis epilepticus often fails to respond or get protracted because of the deficiencies in the management. Common errors include misdiagnosis, wrong route of administration, inadequate dosing of the anti-epileptic drugs, delay in switching to a second-line drug, delay of failure in initiating maintenance therapy with the appropriate drugs, failure to detect and treat the precipitating or underlying causes of the complication of sepsis epilepticus, and delay in providing cardio-respiratory support with endotracheal intubation and vasopressor administration. So, the prognosis of patients with sepsis epilepticus is variable. The factors associated with high mortality include refractory seizures, acute symptomatic etiologies, impairment of the consciousness, longer duration of the sepsis epilepticus, and older ages. So cardiovascular decompensation during sepsis epilepticus, mediated complications, and the over treatment with anti-epileptic drug may also predispose to excess mortality. Coma with recurrent electrographic status and the multi-organ dysfunction carries poor clinical outcome too. So seizure duration less than 10 hours results in lower mortality, and the duration of greater than 20 hours is associated with higher mortality. It doesn't mean that the patient should be convulsing for 10 hours straight, but what it means is that if you are unable to totally control the seizures for 10 hours, like the patient has been having the seizures, some periods, some intermittent recovery periods, and that lasts for less than 10 hours, the mortality rate is going to be decreased. But if it lasts longer, the mortality rate is going to be higher. So outcome in refractory sepsis epilepticus is poor mortality in almost 50%, and only a minority of the patients return to their pre-morbid functional baseline. So in summary, sepsis epilepticus is a medical emergency that needs to be evaluated and managed in a systematic manner. I've seen the systematic manner. Patients who have persistent generalized seizures beyond 5 minutes deserve to be treated as sepsis epilepticus. Don't wait for it to reach 30 minutes. It is important to initiate treatment as soon as the patient is observed, preferably in the pre-hospital phase itself, in order to prevent resistance to medication. Those patients who have failed to respond to 2 of the first-line drugs need to be managed as refractory sepsis epilepticus. Such patients should be moved to intensive care services if available, where they could be administered second-line drugs with ventilator support and continuous EEG monitoring. If there is no facility for intubation, they can be treated with non-sedating medications such as intravenous valproate, levetiracetam, or oral topiramate. It is equally important to attend to the general medical condition of the patient, even as the anti-epileptic drugs are being administered. So here are my references, and thank you for your kind attention. So this slide is just to speak about universal health. So you should keep the promise, leave no one behind. Everybody should receive the same help. I mean, everybody should receive help according to what is his need. So you see here, you have more help because he needs more, and all the rest. So thank you very much.
Excellent, Zolo. Ulrich stepped away, so I'm assuming the duties of the head of future African neurosurgeons. You know, Zolo, our saying should be leave no neurosurgeon behind, because that's the purpose of this platform, is basically to give everyone access to information like you're talking about right now. So, any comments or questions from Regis or Dewin, or comments?
Okay.
Go ahead,
Okay. Hello.
Regis.
Okay. So, very, very, very brilliant presentation. Congratulations, Zolo.
Thank you, Doctor.
Although there were lots of network problems, it was very rich, really very consistent. So I wanted to add just one word in relation to the place of neurosurgery in the management of epilepsy. Surgery is taking more and more place in epilepsy, especially in drug-resistant and partial epilepsy. Note that partial epilepsy is just as deleterious for the brain. So it will be good to quickly consider the indications and operate those who are eligible. Temporal surgery is the most commonly performed because it is generally the most epileptogenic region, with the main cause being sclerosis of the hippocampus. The standard technique is anterior temporal resection with the resection of the anterior third of the temporal lobe, tonsil, hippocampus, and parahippocampal gyrus. A study conducted by Spencer on outcomes of epilepsy surgery in adults and children show that long-term results, about 1 year, suggest an absence of seizure in 15 to 18% to yes, 80% of patients with hippocampal sclerosis and 35 to 75% in extratemporal lesional epilepsy. So that's the thing I want to add. So thank you, Zolo. It was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Regis.
Well, you know, Zola Regis just gave gave an idea for a future presentation: the surgical indications in epilepsy.
Yes.
Regis, maybe you could give a webcast on that.
Yeah, it would be good.
Yeah, because you know, there are certain reasons to have surgery, obviously, in epilepsy, but you know, it may be good to enlighten people when they should start consider surgical intervention. You know, when stop pushing medicine and start thinking of surgery.
Yeah.
So anytime we'll keep in touch about that.
Okay.
Any other comments, Dewin or Zolo? Okay, Zolo, very good.
Okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Is that you, Dewin? Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. My only comment is that was a wonderful presentation, Zolo. It was very informative and quite detailed. Thank you very much. I've learned a lot.
Very good. Very good, Joel. Okay, we'll end this webcast, but hang around because we want to network, okay?
All right, Doctor.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.